Hi everyone and welcome to Module 11. This week we're going to examine a kind of different phase of the food system, and that is institutional food. And initially I was going to focus on different types of institutional food environments, but on second thought and seeing what information was out there and considering that most of you are nutrition professionals who either are working in the hospital or will work in the hospital, or that, on a personal level, all of us typically do experience hospital food personally or through our families, I really decided to focus this more on the hospital setting. So the reason that I wanted to talk about institutional food production in the first place was that, with all that we've been talking about throughout this course, a lot of the changes that we need to make are, on a kind of very macro, policy level, or on an individual level where we're making all these individual choices. And when I was doing, especially in my internship where I went to a lot of different sites, I think what was so striking was that there are so many people being served in these institutional settings, and yet these institutions are under the greatest pressure to have kind of the cheap processed food that we've talked about, although usually the people who are in these getting food through these settings are oftentimes the most vulnerable. So if you do think about a school setting, you would think of children, and especially in a hospital setting, of course, we are thinking of individuals who are healing and going through health problems and also probably emotional problems as well. So institutional food production can be a really big thing to tackle. I don't know if you have worked in these settings, there's a lot of food waste. There are definitely wonderful examples that we'll see throughout this module of innovators who are really addressing the problem of the lack of sustainability in the food system, both with the quality of food and the waste, packaging, etc. So, as I started going through the materials, I really decided that I wanted this week to be more solutions based. I think we've got had enough of what the issues are leading up to this. And so I really wanted to give you some tools for addressing environmental nutrition in these types of settings. So most of your materials, you do have 4 readings, but 3 of them are pretty short and easy, and they're very solutions focused, as are the other lectures that I'll have you view. So I'm just going to do a very brief lecture today about a topic that I think is really, so when you think of food in the hospital setting, that's what most of your readings and your main lecture will be about, actual food service in the hospital. But I also wanted to address another topic, environmental nutrition, that is more in my interest area and that I think is vitally important and that we don't think about from an environmental perspective, and that's breastfeeding. So, of course, breastfeeding promotion needs to happen in a variety of settings, but the hospital is really, really crucially integral for breastfeeding promotion, because it's the kind of these most crucial days where we're establishing breastfeeding and setting the mother-infant dyad up for success. So I think most of you are very well versed in the benefits of breastfeeding. I won't belabor this, but there was a very recent meta-analysis done of breastfeeding studies done in the Lancet just this year, so I would highly recommend that. There's a whole bunch of analyses, including economic benefits, etc. So if you are interested in that, the reference is down there. But of course, no news to us, breastfeeding benefits the child. It protects against many different kinds of infections, ear infections, respiratory infections, necrotizing enterocolitis. It increases intelligence in this very rigorous meta-analysis, and probably does reduce risk of overweight and diabetes. For the mother, it protects against breast cancer, improves spacing between births, and probably protects against ovarian cancer and type 2 diabetes. So now let's talk about why breastfeeding, why are we talking about breastfeeding in this class in environmental nutrition? Well, there's actually a lot of overlap between breastfeeding and environmental sustainability. So we can look at this in a few different ways. So the first way that we can look at it is purely from the approach of what we've been discussing in this class, sustainability. Breastfeeding is a renewable resource. It comes straight from the breast. We don't need to package it up. Whereas when we have breast milk substitutes such as formula, think about all of the steps that it takes to get that final product of the formula. So of course we have to raise the cow. We know the environmental impact of dairy production. We have to process this according to very specific metrics. We have to dehydrate it into a powder. Then we have to reconstitute it with water. We have to sterilize our bottles. We have all the packaging of formula. We have the plastic for the bottles and the nipples on the bottles, metal for the cans, labels for printing, tons and tons of formula marketing. And of course, we also have to transport this formula from the farm to the processing, to the retail environment, to home, of course. And we have waste because of the production and all of the packaging, etc. And then another way to think of it, so this, all of this came from, let's see, what's it called? The International Baby Food Action Network. There's actually very little formal literature on this topic, but I think we'll see more coming around the bend for sure. But so most of these points are from this article that you can look at if you're interested. But I think one thing that was really overlooked is we know there's a lot of waste just in the medical profession in general. We have to sterilize everything. We have to sterilize in and out when we're coming. We have to throw away, our needles and all of our medical equipment. So if you think about it, there's just an enormous amount of waste that's generated in hospitals. And really, if we're talking about that breastfeeding can reduce risk of all of these adverse health conditions, then really we're preventing this waste in the first place from having to address these complications as they occur. So this is kind of a very straightforward way of thinking of breastfeeding promotion and the environment. So compare everything that I just said to breastfeeding, where yes, absolutely, mom does have to consume food. Breast milk doesn't come from nowhere. Of course, mom has to consume the food to make the breast milk. But then, baby goes right on. No need for any of this that we're seeing here, really. Okay, and then here's a quote that was posed to the United Nations. I would challenge this august body to calculate the energy costs of the production of breast milk substitutes formula, the amount of water used, the chemicals, the trees, and other resources used for packaging and promotion, and fill any energy for sterilizing water for breast milk substitute preparation. So that's just kind of a review of everything we just went over in the last slide. However, there's other ways that we can look at breastfeeding in the environment as well. So we've talked a lot about food security in this class, and we've also talked about the very potential impact of climate change because of our current practices. And that climate change very well, of course, we cannot predict the future, but what we see that's happening right now and predictions from the experts are that we're going to see a lot more environmental disasters. And what this really means, especially in these low-income areas that we've examined before, is that we have the most vulnerable populations at the most risk. So low-income mothers and young children, and we've seen that in the literature. So I think one challenge is to think about food security. So let's pretend there's no economic disaster, just economic hardship, that I'm in a very poor area. Well, if I'm using formula, there's a very real chance. So if, for those who aren't familiar, once you introduce formula, usually breast milk supply goes down, and it really can get to the point where there is no breast milk supply and one needs to rely heavily on formula. So think about if I have economic hardship, I'm living in an area, an area without very many resources. Well, the time comes I need to buy formula and I'm not, I don't have the money for it. So what often may end up happening is malnutrition for infants. Um, Another issue to think about is in emergency situations and just in some low resource areas is water quality to make the formula. And then in emergency situations, which we are definitely experiencing in our world right now, think about the refugee crisis. How are these infants being fed? What is the most feasible way? And I guess to bring this, sorry, I'm kind of jumping all over, but if we have these climate disasters, what is the best way to get food security to these vulnerable young children? And it's mother's milk. The safest food in an emergency is mother's own milk, and that's the United States Breastfeeding Committee. So here's a old time magazine, but this could be from right now in the refugee crisis. We have moms on the run, we have many young infants, and obviously the highest quality food in these crises would be mother's milk, and who knows if formula would even be available. The next issue is food sovereignty, and we've discussed that in this class as well, in the food security module. And so the authors of this report talked about sovereignty in a way that I hadn't really thought about it. So with so what these professionals are posing is that with breast milk compared to formula, individuals are at the center of production. They're not relying on these big corporations. They're not relying on these market institutions. And the market for formula feeding, for those who don't know, is just absolutely enormous. It was $41.5 billion in 2012 and is expected to increase by at least 50% in the next 5 years after that. So there's enormous marketing pressure for moms to kind of buy into this formula feeding. And of course, I definitely recognize that formula feeding is invaluable in some situations, but we're just talking about for the majority of people, for the vast majority of people. So taking the infant's food source out of this kind of corporate bottleneck that we've examined could really address food sovereignty for this topic. So here's another quote. Formula feeding is not only a disaster in an emergency situation, it's also a disaster for the environment. It contributes to increased carbon emissions for all the reasons we've talked about before, pollution, waste, and environmental degradation, which can cause these emergencies. So that's kind of an interesting way to think about it. And I think that it's really in line with what we've already seen, that, you know, we're causing these problems with our food system, and then at the same time trying to address the problems that have been caused, all while functioning in this food system. So one issue that I really want, so there's another way to look at it too, which is mothers who are exposed to environmental contaminants and whether that gets in the breast milk. And I've definitely heard this as reason to not breastfeed, because we are really, especially women in low-income populations or areas that have maybe rundown housing or something like that, women are really exposed to a lot of harmful environmental chemicals. So that can get into the breast milk, and absolutely needs to be considered for women in order to decrease exposure to get infants the least contaminated breast milk possible. Some of these contaminants can pass through the breast milk. However, it's very misleading to say that don't breastfeed because there's these chemicals in the breast milk, because that would just be assuming that the alternative was an absolutely pure and perfect product, which of course it's not. Infant formula contains many chemicals of concern, which is not hard to believe as we're looking at how it's produced and going through the whole system that we've already examined. So that, it includes many chemicals of concern too. And even with industrial chemicals in breast milk, the benefits still outweigh reverting to breast milk substitutes. So in the hospital, again, is one place where we really need to drive home promoting breastfeeding. And yeah, I'll just say that. So the kind of really big thing in breastfeeding right now is the baby friendly hospital initiatives that are promoted by the World Health Organization and by UNICEF, but are also supported and endorsed by all of the major maternal and child health authorities, and those are listed here. And here are all of our breastfeeding friendly steps. And actually in Ohio, there's a really big initiative called Ohio First Steps to reward hospitals who even take 2 steps at a time. So when hospitals do meet all of these 10 steps, which is a very difficult process, then they become certified baby-friendly hospital. And you can see that not all of them are directly related to breastfeeding. Some of them are about skin to skin. Some of them are about allowing the baby to room in. I've heard from breastfeeding professionals that the most difficult part is to get these formula samples out of the hospitals. So that because the idea is that, and research shows that when mothers are sent home with these formula samples, that then they're more likely to discontinue breastfeeding prematurely. So these are really the steps that we need in the hospital. And another interesting thing for many of you who do work in a hospital or will work in a hospital is that in the hospitals that are certified, which this number is growing really very rapidly, every single staff member in the hospital needs to be trained in promoting breastfeeding, with the thought that this is just not about the lactation consultants. This is about everybody creating an environment of support for breastfeeding. And as we can see, that does not only benefit us in the health advantages that we typically think of with breastfeeding, but there's also a lot of other interesting factors that we see in environmental nutrition that may have an impact. Okay, so here's just a couple of things I just found in the news that are extremely recent and related. And you're going to see a lot of really neat examples of hospital food service in your lecture and in your readings. But so this was one that was just very recent. Mercy Medical's focus on local helps patient satisfaction. So when we're improving the food environment in our hospitals, it's not only about trying to sleep a little better at night. It's not about that necessarily at all, but it's about improving patient satisfaction. Here's another one that I thought was really interesting. It's actually from Hong Kong, but how innovative that these, I'll pull it up first. All right, this is taking a while. So it's this hospital in Hong Kong that has actually installed a composter in their cafeteria hospital, and they're using it to and they're using it to produce, this was just from today that I saw this, they're using it to produce fertilizer. Oh, I'm sorry, this one didn't work. But they're using it to produce fertilizer so that they can use it to grow more food. So they're actually composting in the hospital. And it may sound unhygienic, but it's a very secure receptacle that this compost is going into. And then just a couple of other kind of news stories that have come to my attention from a student and from just seeing it in the news that I thought would be relevant to us. This computer is not really working well. Okay, so the first one was from yesterday. Sorry, I'm a couple of weeks ahead of you. This was in March 15th. And this was an article from NPR, the 27 solutions that could help the U.S. Slash food waste. So that just goes to show you what a really very relevant topic this is. And they talk about President Obama addressing these specific goals of reducing waste, as we talked about, and the strategies to do that. So if you're interested, there's a lot of information there. And then this last one was a radio segment or a blog segment that one of you sent me, and I won't make you listen to it right now because it's 43 minutes long, but it is talking about the restaurant business model and social justice that we've that we addressed during Module 6, and it's just a new way of, a new person that's presenting it, a new way of looking at it, and again, that was just from this month as well, so if you're interested in that, that is available as well. So that's all that I have for today, and otherwise, I'm going to let you examine the ratings. And there is an out. There is two other viewings to look at, so I'm going to cut this short. But as always, I look forward to hearing your reflections on this topic, and I hope you all are doing well and have a good day.